Welcome to Buddha Bedtime Stories. Each night we return, not to something new, but to something ancient and already within us. Tonight, you'll hear stories that have traveled through centuries, whispers from Zen masters, monks, and seekers who left behind trails of wisdom like footprints in soft earth. Before we begin, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it for you right now? You're part of a global circle of stillness, connected not by noise, but by presence. Let this be your time, a space to breathe, to let go, and to remember that peace is not found in the future, but in the stillness of this moment. These stories are quiet lanterns. Each one illuminates something simple, profound, and easily forgotten in the noise of daily life. Let their glow guide you back to yourself. So rest now. Take one slow, quiet breath with me. And as you exhale, let your shoulders soften, your mind settle, and your spirit begin to return home. Let's begin with the first story. In a small temple nestled between pine trees and fog, there burned a single candle. It was placed each morning in the center of the meditation hall. No glass shield, no tall holder, just a quiet flame in a shallow dish. It flickered gently as monks came and went. It was not large, not dazzling, but it was always there. Software steady, alive. One morning, a gust of wind swept through the open window. The flame bent low, danced wildly, then steadied, then bent again. A novice sitting nearby grew anxious. He reached to close the window, but the old teacher touched his arm and whispered, "Wait, let it breathe." The flame, though small, did not go out. It fluttered, dimmed, but held on. The room stayed still, and after a few moments the wind passed. The candle straightened, its glow calm once more. The teacher turned to the novice and said, "This is your mind. This is your breath. This is your life." A candle by nature is vulnerable. One sharp breath, and it's gone. One careless movement, and it's lost. But that fragility is also its power, because the candle doesn't resist the wind. It doesn't fight to stay lit. It simply responds, bows, sways, returns. In Buddhism, the flame is often used as a metaphor for consciousness, flickering, ever-changing, not a solid thing, but a process, a dance between wick, wax, and air. Your thoughts are like the flame, your body, the wick, your breath, the air that sustains it, and the wind. That's life. The candle cannot control the wind, but it learns to dance with it. And that is the teaching. The novice asked, "But what if the flame goes out?" The teacher smiled. "Then we light it again, and again, and again. This is the practice. You will lose your calm. You will be shaken. Your light will dim, but the wick is still there. The wax remains. You are never without the capacity to be rekindled. There is a Tibetan saying, 'Better to light a single candle than to curse the darkness.' But even deeper is this. Learn to trust the candle even when the wind rises." In the days that followed, the novice watched the flame more closely. He began to notice how it moved, how it bent without fear, how it never clung to its shape from a moment before. And one morning, during Zazen, as a storm passed outside, he did not flinch. He simply watched the flame bend and return. And in that moment, something in him softened too. This is what meditation teaches, not how to still the wind, but how to let the flame bend without going out, how to meet life's changes with grace, how to stop fearing your own flicker. Grief is a wind, so is joy, so is anger, so is love. You cannot block the breeze without also losing the air you need to burn. You must stay open, even when it stings. Especially then, commentary. The Candle and the Wind is not a story about fragility alone. It's about resilience without resistance. It's about remaining warm, soft, and lit, even when the conditions shift. Even when nothing stays steady but your own willingness to begin again. We often think strength looks like staying the same. But sometimes strength is in swaying, in letting go, in trusting that the flame inside you is not so easily put out. You do not need to burn like a bonfire. You only need to glow enough to see your next step, to offer light to the person beside you, to remind the darkness, I am still here. The teacher once said, a candle gives all it has, and still the world is warmed by its passing. So be the candle. Even if your light flickers, even if no one sees, even if the wind blows harder tomorrow, burn anyway, not for show, but because this is who you are. There was once a wealthy man who lived in a great house. The house was vast, with many rooms, winding corridors, tall beams and ancient wood. But it was old and dry, and one day it caught fire. Smoke slipped beneath the doors, flames curled along the rafters, the walls creaked with heat, and the embers began to rise. Inside the house were his children, dozens of them, laughing, playing, unaware. He called out to them from the courtyard, "Come out, the house is burning." But the children only blinked. The house was all they had known. It was familiar, full of games and colours and corners to hide. They did not see the danger. They did not feel the urgency. They went on playing. The man's heart pounded. The flames licked closer. If he shouted again, they might ignore him. If he ran in to fetch them, the structure might collapse. So instead, he tried something else. He called out again, not with panic, but with a new offer. "Children, come outside. There are carts waiting for you. Goat carts, deer carts, ox carts, pulled by beautiful animals adorned with bells and gold. Come now, and they are yours." The children stopped, looked up, and ran out of the burning house in delight. Safe, laughing, alive. But when they reached the courtyard, there were no goat carts or deer carts. Only one great cart, drawn by a white ox, sturdy, wide, strong, more magnificent than they could have imagined. And the father, calm now, relieved, invited each child onto the cart. It would carry them far from danger. It would hold them safely. This is the parable of the burning house, one of the most famous teachings in the Lotus Sutra. It is not about deception. It is about skillful means, what Mahayana Buddhism calls upaya. It is about the wisdom to speak not with rigid truth, but with compassion shaped to the listener's heart. The father in the story is the Buddha. The burning house is samsara, the world of illusion, suffering, impermanence. The children are us, unaware, absorbed in our games, our distractions, our beliefs that everything is fine. And the carts? They are the paths, the ways we are called out of delusion. Sometimes we need promises. Sometimes we need symbols. Sometimes we come to practice seeking peace or healing or clarity. These may not be ultimate truth, but they are ways out of the fire. And the Buddha, seeing this, offers whatever will work, not to lie, but to save. Truth is not always about telling the whole thing at once. Sometimes it's about offering a step forward, a thread through the smoke, a voice that reaches someone where they are, not where they should be. There is a famous Mahayana saying, "The Dharma is like a raft used to cross the river, but once across, you don't carry the raft on your back." In the same way, the Buddha does not cling to doctrines. He uses teachings as tools and discards them when they no longer serve. In the story, the children are not punished for believing in goat carts, because the Buddha is not interested in being right. He is interested in awakening, and if it takes a golden bell or a beautiful cart to bring someone to safety, then so be it, because wisdom without compassion is incomplete. Sometimes we do the same. We come to practice for small reasons. We want to breathe better, to sleep more easily, to escape stress, but slowly, something shifts. The real ox cart arrives. The deeper teachings come. We begin to see the house for what it is. We begin to wake up, not just from the flames, but from the idea that we ever truly belonged inside them. This story teaches us about timing, about patience, about knowing that not every truth needs to be told at once, and that helping others awaken is not about shouting, "The house is on fire." It's about seeing what they hear, what they fear, what they love, and then speaking to that. The Buddha could have thundered teachings from the sky. He could have demanded obedience. Instead, he walked with people, listened, adapted, and then gave them the vehicle they were ready for. Some criticize this parable. They say, "Wasn't it a lie?" But what matters is the result. The children were safe, and the vehicle they received was not lesser, but greater. They were drawn to joy, but found liberation. Sometimes a mother tells a child there are stars hiding behind the clouds, not to mislead, but to soothe. And the stars are there. Sometimes a doctor gives medicine sweetened with honey, because healing must be palatable, not just potent. And so too with the Dharma, it meets us where we are, and leads us to where we didn't even know we could go. The burning house is this world, not because the world is evil, but because it cannot last. Everything inside it, pleasure, power, possession, even identity, will one day fall. But the Buddha doesn't shame us for being inside. He simply calls us out, however he can. You may be on a goat cart path now, or waiting by the door, or still deep inside the house, holding on to something you love. It's okay. You are seen, and when you're ready, there will be a voice, and a cart, and a way through the smoke. The leaves whispered of him before his name ever reached a village gate. Parents clutched their children. Merchants rerouted their caravans. Monks bowed their heads, not in reverence, but in caution. For the man they called Angulimala roamed the forests like a curse in flesh. They said he wore a garland of severed fingers. They said he moved like wind through tall grass, too fast, too silent, too deadly. They said he had no soul, but the truth was more complicated. He had once been ahimsaka, a child born to a noble Brahmin family, gentle, studious, with a heart like spring water, clear, eager, pure. His name meant harmless, and for a time it fit. His parents glowed with pride. His teachers praised his mind. He recited texts with ease and never raised his voice. He walked the sacred path with reverence. But even gardens grow shadows, and in the heart of his teacher, a master once kind, jealousy stirred like embers beneath calm. What if this boy outshines me? What if he is remembered while I am forgotten? And so, the poison was planted. Whispers behind closed doors. Lies dropped like oil into water. The teacher turned the other students against Ahimsaka. Then, turning to the boy himself, he spoke. If you truly wish to complete your training, bring me a gift. 1,000 lives, 1,000 fingers. Ahimsaka was horrified, but loyalty ran deep, and confusion deeper still. His world, once steady, spun sideways. The teachings twisted, the compass lost. And so he walked into the forest, heart trembling, mind clouded. At first, he resisted. Then, he rationalized. Then, he obeyed. One by one, lives fell. One by one, fingers were taken. He strung them on a garland around his neck, not out of pride, but as proof. A grotesque tally, a vow he could not break. Ahimsaka was gone. Only Angulimala remained. Years passed. Villages emptied at the sound of his approach. No warrior could stop him. No plea could reach him. He lived in the trees like a demon, fed by fear, haunted by silence. But sometimes, late at night, he would sit by the river and weep, not loudly, not dramatically, just a single, soundless shudder, as if his soul still remembered what it used to be. Then came the day everything changed. A new rumor reached the region. A monk in saffron robes was walking the land, barefoot and alone, unarmed, unafraid. His presence turned swords to dust. His gaze stilled storms. The Buddha. Angulimala laughed when he heard it. Let him come, he said. Let me take his finger too. And so he waited. It was mid-morning when the figure appeared, walking slowly along the forest path, robe brushing the grass, eyes lowered, bowl in hand. No fear, no hesitation. Angulimala stepped out from the trees, blade drawn. But the monk did not stop, nor did he hurry, just walked. Calm, present, silent. Something in Angulimala snapped. With a roar he charged. The earth pounded beneath him. His breath came wild. His blade glinted in the sun. But no matter how fast he ran, the monk remained just ahead, neither speeding up nor slowing down, until suddenly he stopped and turned. Their eyes met. The forest held its breath. Angulimala's chest heaved. "Stop!" he shouted. "Stop walking!" And the Buddha spoke, calm, clear, eternal. "I have already stopped, Angulimala. It is you who has not." The words hit harder than any weapon. Stopped? The monk had stopped? Angulimala blinked. "What do you mean?" "I have stopped chasing harm, stopped feeding the fires of anger, greed, and ignorance. But you still run. Angulimala lowered his sword. Not all the way, just a little, but enough. What should I do? And the Buddha stepped closer, unshaken, unarmed, unafraid. Drop the weapon, he said, and follow. For a long moment, Angulimala stood frozen. The forest was silent. Even the wind waited. Then, with trembling hands, the man removed the garland from his neck. Each finger clattered to the ground, like a lifetime falling apart. He dropped the sword and fell to his knees. I don't know how to walk your path, he whispered. The Buddha extended a hand, not to lift, but to witness. You already have, he said. The townspeople were outraged. When word spread that Angulimala, the killer, the terror, the demon of the forest, had become a monk, they rioted. They threw stones at him as he walked. They spat at his feet. They demanded his blood. But he did not strike back. He carried his bowl. He bowed when struck. He sat in silence and wept again, but not for himself. For them, one day after a particularly violent outburst from the crowd, he returned to the monastery bruised and bleeding. The Buddha looked at him, eyes deep as sky. You endure much, Angulimala. Angulimala bowed his head. I deserve it. The past is a shadow, the Buddha said. It follows you until you stop turning to chase it. One morning, he heard a woman crying in labor outside the village. The pain was great, the danger greater, but the people refused to help. She's cursed, they whispered. Her child will be born into blood. Angulimala stepped forward. I will go. The villagers gasped. You, the murderer, you'll curse her. But he walked past their fear and knelt beside the woman. His voice was soft. By the truth I now live, by the harm I have abandoned. May you and your child be safe. And she was. The birth was clean, the child strong. From that day, the whispers began to change. Years later, the man once known as Angulimala became a teacher of peace. He lived quietly. He sat often. He spoke gently. Children no longer feared him. Old men bowed to him. Mothers called upon him for blessings. But he never forgot the garland, never forgot the sword. They were not trophies. They were reminders of how far a man can fall and how far a soul can rise. When his final day came, it was quiet. The monks gathered near. He sat upright, as always, in meditation. He did not cry, did not call out. He simply exhaled, one long, peaceful breath, and let go. And in that final stillness, the forest that once whispered his name in fear, now whispered something else, forgiveness. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. The gates of Kapilavastu had not changed. They still stood tall and carved with symbols of victory, still flanked by soldiers in polished armor, still framed by the scent of sandalwood and rose water poured in offering. But the man walking toward them now was not the same prince who once slipped away into the dark, his silks folded neatly beside a sleeping child. He wore no crown, no jewelry, only the ochre robes of a wandering monk, faded by sun and softened by dust. His feet were bare, his hands folded around a simple begging bowl. And though the guards stiffened at the sight of him, there was something in his stillness, his presence, that made them hesitate. "Is that?" one whispered. But the other could not answer, for it had been nearly 7 years since Prince Siddhartha vanished into the forest. 7 years since the kingdom was draped in grief and silence, since King Suddhodana walked the palace gardens alone, since Yasodhara raised their son Rahula beneath the weight of unanswered questions. Now the prince had returned, but not as a prince, not even as a man of the world. He returned as the Buddha, the awakened one. The message reached the palace like a whisper carried on wind. He has returned. In the great hall, King Suddhodana stood without speaking for a long time. Then, with deliberate steps, he left his throne. No guards followed him, no procession was summoned. He walked alone down the long stone corridor, past the memories carved into every wall. He found Siddhartha standing beneath the Bodhi tree that had been planted in the garden long ago. It was not the Bodhi tree, but it cast the same kind of peace, broad shade, dappled light, and the hush of old leaves. Father and son faced each other, one with hair white as ash and eyes heavy with time, the other with a shaven head and a face so calm it made the air feel still. "You left without a word," the king said at last, his voice steady but thick. "I had no words," the Buddha replied, "only the question. And now you return with answers. I return with understanding. Not to rule, but to teach. Not to reclaim, but to share." The king looked at him long and deeply, as if trying to trace the child he once cradled, the young man who rode out in golden chariots, the son who vanished like a dream before dawn. At last, the king nodded. "Then let your mother see you, and let the boy." Yasodhara did not run to meet him. She did not cry. She did not fall to her knees. She stood in the doorway of the inner chamber, her sari plain, her hair pulled back, her face worn not with age, but with waiting. "I knew," she said quietly. "I knew you had not died." The Buddha lowered his gaze. "I died to what I was," he said, "so that I could be born to what is." "And us?" she asked. "What are we now?" He stepped closer but did not reach out. The rules of a renunciant were clear. No touch, no home, no possession, and yet his eyes held something that made her breath catch. An ache, a reverence, a peace deeper than comfort. "I carry you with me," he said, "not in desire, but in truth. In knowing that even love must be freed from clinging to shine in full." Behind her, a boy's voice echoed through the hall. "Mother, who is it?" Rahula stepped into the light. He was 7, just tall enough to look up with question, just old enough to sense what was unspoken. His eyes, so like his father's, widened as he saw the man in robes. He looked at his mother, then back at the man. "Is this?" Yasodhara nodded slowly. "This is your father." The boy approached carefully, drawn not by familiarity but by gravity. The Buddha knelt, bringing his eyes level with the child's. Rahula looked at the robes, at the bowl, at the bare feet, dusty and calloused. "You are a king," the boy said. "I was," the Buddha replied, "but everyone says you will always be a king." "I have chosen another path." "Why?" The Buddha did not speak right away. Instead, he looked at Rahula, not with the eyes of a father returning, but with the gaze of one who sees the seeds of suffering in even the smallest questions. To be a king is to protect borders, he said. But the greatest kingdom is not land, it is the mind. I left to master that realm and to help others do the same. Rahula stared at him, then reached out, tentatively, silently, and touched the bowl in his father's hands. Are you hungry? I eat only what is given freely. The boy blinked. I'll give. The next morning, as sunlight touched the eastern gate, the people of Kapilavastu gathered in the streets. They had heard. They had whispered. Some had doubted. Others had hoped. Now they saw. The Buddha walked barefoot through the city with his disciples behind him, his bowl held gently, his eyes neither lifted in pride nor lowered in shame, just present. And beside him, a small boy walked, his steps careful, his face solemn. Who is that? People whispered. That is his son, someone said. That is Rahula. When the procession reached the palace gates again, Rahula turned to his mother. I want to go with him, he said. Yasodhara's heart trembled. You are still young, she whispered. You have not seen the world. But I have seen him, Rahula said, and he is the world. She knelt and held his face in her hands, kissed his forehead, and let him go, not out of abandonment, but out of trust. Rahula turned to his father. Teach me. That night, under a canopy of stars, the Buddha gave his son the precepts. A child novice, a seeker born not of blood, but of choice. He named him Rahula, not in casual use, but in truth. Fetter. For that is what the boy had been once, a golden chain pulling at his heart. But now the chain had turned to light. Not attachment, but connection. Not weight, but legacy. The Buddha looked at his son as he slept beside the fire, curled in a robe too big, holding a wooden begging bowl like a treasure. And for a moment, the silence was not empty. It was full. Years later, Rahula would become a monk in full, respected for his insight and restraint. He would ask deep questions and receive answers not as a prince's son, but as a seeker in his own right. But none would forget that first night. When the Buddha returned, not with chariots, but with calm, not to rule, but to gaze into his son's eyes, and say, without speaking, I left so you would not inherit illusion. I returned so you could choose the truth. And in that silent gaze was everything a father could offer and everything a seeker could need. She was just the cleaning woman. That's what most called her. Not nun, not practitioner, not devotee, just the woman who swept the temple. She arrived before sunrise, her hair tied back in a grey knot, her robes plain and faded, her broom worn thin at the bristles. She did not chant, did not preach, did not study sutras in the main hall. She swept the stone walkways, the meditation hall. The steps no one noticed were dusty until they were clean. And when she swept, she smiled. Some of the younger monks whispered, she's not really practicing. She doesn't even sit in the morning zazen. She just does chores. But she never responded. She bowed to them anyway. Years passed. One by one, the monks left for higher temples, deeper study, more advanced masters. But she remained, still sweeping, still silent, still smiling. One spring morning, the abbot called for an assembly. The monks gathered, some sitting in strict posture, others blinking away sleep. The abbot raised his voice gently. "I have been observing this temple for many years," he said. "And in all this time, only one among you has reached the heart of the Dharma." Heads turned. The scholars straightened their backs. The meditation leaders adjusted their robes. The younger monks held their breath. And then the abbot looked to her, the woman with the broom. She was in the corner, brushing dust from the edge of a wooden beam. She paused, looked up, and smiled. A silence fell over the room. Then whispers. But she never studied the Diamond Sutra. She never debates koans. She doesn't even recite the Heart Sutra. The abbot turned to them and said, "She lives it." This is the story of embodied wisdom, the kind that doesn't speak loudly, but moves like breath through a humble act. Commentary. There is a great misunderstanding in spiritual life, that awakening comes only through texts, or teachers, or temples. But the Buddha taught in forests. He sat beneath trees. He pointed to rivers and mountains and empty bowls. He said, "The way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart." The woman who swept the temple did not need to talk about mindfulness. She was mindfulness. Every stroke of her broom was deliberate, every step a prayer, every breath a chant. She did not perform her devotion, she lived it. You can memorize every scripture and still miss the truth. You can quote the sutras and still live with bitterness. But you cannot sweep the floor with love for 30 years and not be changed. The Dharma is not performance. It is not approval. It is presence. Many monks seek truth like a prize. They strive. They compare. They seek recognition. But the woman who swept the temple had no audience, no ambition, only a broom, a path, and her attention. That is enough. That is more than enough. There's a Zen saying, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." Because the truth doesn't take you away from the world. It brings you deeper into it. It makes you pay attention. To dust in corners, to the sound of your own breath, to how gently you place a bowl on the table. We live in a time of noise, of opinions, of spectacle, of credentials. But the Dharma whispers, sweep, breathe, smile, and mean it. That is enough. So wherever you are, whether folding laundry, washing dishes, answering emails, tying your child's shoes, do it with all of you. Do it like the woman who swept the temple, and let the dust be your teacher too. The boy stood barefoot in the dust. Beyond the village, where the rice paddies gave way to forest, he searched. The sun hung low, casting long shadows through the bamboo groves. A wind stirred the leaves, but he did not move. His eyes scanned the ground for tracks, for broken twigs, for any sign of the ox. He had lost it, or perhaps he had never truly found it. And so began the journey, not of chasing, but of remembering. In Zen tradition, the ox-herding pictures are a series of 10 images, each one a moment in the path toward awakening, not literal, not linear, but true in the way that poetry is true. They begin with a search. A boy looking for an ox. But the ox is not made of flesh. It is the self, The mind, the original nature. The Buddha within, hidden beneath thought, lost in distraction, masked by craving. And the boy, he is all of us. First, searching for the ox, the boy leaves the village. He's tired of ordinary life. He's heard rumors of peace, of awakening, of something real beneath the noise. So he begins to search. He reads sutras, he listens to teachers, he sits in meditation. But his mind is full of fog. Thoughts crowd his vision. Doubt clings like vines. Still, he continues, because something inside him knows there is more than this. 2. Seeing the traces. One morning, while gathering wood, he sees a bent stalk, then a hoofprint in the mud. His heart jumps. Maybe I'm close. He kneels, follows the signs. In his practice, he notices moments of stillness. A breath that feels vast, a silence that doesn't feel empty. Just hints, traces, but enough to give him hope. 3. Catching sight of the ox. Suddenly, there it is, a glimpse through the trees, a flash of black hide, a tail flick. The boy freezes, joy rises, and fear. Because now it's real, not just a concept, not just a goal. The ox exists, but it is wild. It does not come when called, and when the boy steps closer, it bolts. 4th, catching the ox. He runs, he sweats, he stumbles. At last, he grabs the rope. The ox bucks, throws its weight against him. It drags him through the grass. But he holds tight. This is the phase of discipline, of hard practice, of struggling with the mind that wants to flee. It takes effort, structure, ritual. Again and again he pulls the ox back, until finally it yields. Not because it is broken, but because it begins to trust. 5. Taming the ox. Now he walks beside it, still holding the rope but not fighting. He brushes its coat, feeds it grain. They sit together beneath a tree. This is calm abiding. Meditation deepens. The mind, once unruly, now rests beside him like a friend. Joy rises, not from excitement, but from peace. 6. Riding the ox home. The boy climbs on its back. He plays the flute as they travel. There's laughter now. The ox no longer resists. They are one motion, one rhythm, the self and the selfless walking home together. Some think this is the end, but it is not. There is more, always more. 7. The ox transcended. One morning, he wakes, and the ox is gone. Not lost, gone, dissolved. Because there was never a separate ox. Only the illusion of separation. There is no one taming another. No duality. Only being, only suchness. The boy sits in silence, and everything is enough. 8. Both ox and self forgotten. Now, not even the boy remains. No watcher, no watched. Just sky, wind, movement without mover, compassion without identity, peace without object. This is awakening. Not a peak to climb, but a dissolving of the climber. 9. Returning to the source. But even this is not the end. He returns to the world, to the place he left behind. The village, the noise, the errands. He no longer seeks to escape it. Because the sacred is here too, in the washing of bowls, in the crying of babies, in the marketplace and the broom. 10th, entering the marketplace with open hands. He walks through the village, dirty feet, laughing eyes, no halo, no robe, just a man carrying firewood and smiling at children. He does not preach, does not speak of truth. He simply helps, lends a hand, bows to beggars, listens without interrupting, because he carries nothing and gives everything. Commentary: the ox herding. Pictures are not a ladder, they are a mirror. We move forward, then fall back, then forward again. Sometimes we glimpse the ox for a moment, then lose it for years. And that's okay, because the journey is not about getting somewhere. It's about seeing clearly where we are. The boy is not special. He is not a saint. He is you. Waking up slowly, letting go gently, returning home freely, and realizing it was never the ox that was missing, only the one who thought it was separate. As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. One morning, as the temple bell echoed over the hills, a feather drifted across the gravel path. Software white, weightless. It twisted in the breeze, rising, falling, then gliding gently down near the feet of an old monk named Shiro. He stopped mid-step, not because the feather blocked his way, but because he had learned that even the smallest interruption might carry a lesson. He bent down, lifted it with 2 fingers, and held it up to the light. It was a simple thing, delicate, almost nothing, and yet it had travelled from some distant bird, perhaps one flying over the valley, or shaken loose in a morning preen. It had no wings, no voice, no will, yet here it was, resting, present, carried. That day during tea, Shiro spoke to the novices. He placed the feather on the center of the table. "Is this free?" he asked. The youngest tilted his head. "It floats on the wind, so..." "Yes?" Another frowned. "But it goes wherever the wind takes it. That's not freedom, it's powerlessness." A third sipped her tea and said nothing. Shiro smiled. "All 3 of you are correct," he said, "depending on how you define freedom." He continued, "Most people think freedom means control, to choose, to decide, to resist what moves us." He looked out the open window. "But the feather has no resistance, no plan, and yet it dances." The novices leaned in. He pointed toward the sky. "If the wind blew north, it went north. If the wind changed, so did the feather. But never once did it say, 'I failed.'" There was a pause. One novice finally asked, "Then what is the lesson, Master?" Shiro replied softly, "There are times to steer and times to yield." He picked up the feather again. True freedom is not always in direction, but in the way we ride the currents. Later that week, the temple cat fell ill. The novices fretted. One cried. Another tried to feed it broth. But Shiro simply sat beside it. He offered no solutions, no prayers, only presence. When the cat passed, Shiro gathered the novices. He did not speak of death, only of the wind. You cannot hold the wind in your hands, he said, but you can feel its path against your face. He paused, and when it carries something away, you do not curse the air. You bow to its rhythm. The novices returned to their chores, softer now, quieter, less frantic in their attempts to fix what could not be fixed. One afternoon, as a storm gathered, a gust swept through the open courtyard. A lone feather rose from the steps, twirled, and vanished over the garden wall. Shiro saw it, smiled. He whispered, "Carried, yet free." There's a saying in Chan Buddhism: the bird leaves no tracks in the sky. The wind leaves no footprints in the grass. The feather, like the mind, is most graceful when it stops fighting where it's going. In the heart of the city of Vaishali, not far from the clamour of markets and the perfume of jasmine, there lived a man unlike any other. He was wealthy, yes. His robes dyed in saffron and silk. His estate wide as a lake. He was respected, known to governors and scholars alike. He was a householder, a father, a merchant. But more than that, he was awake. His name was Vimalakirti. Unlike the monks, he did not wear simple robes. Unlike the ascetics, he did not live in the forest. He lived in the world, but not of it. He walked through noise with the silent mind. He moved through illusion without being caught. And so his teachings were sharper than sermons, his presence more disruptive than thunder. One day, it was said that Vimalakirti had fallen ill, not from weakness, but from compassion. He had taken on the sickness of the world so others might awaken. Word reached the Buddha and his disciples, so the Buddha asked, "Who will go and visit the ailing Vimalakirti?" One by one, the great disciples declined. Shariputra, Maudgalyayana, Ananda. Each said, "Master, I cannot. I have debated Vimalakirti before, and I was humbled." Because this layman, this non-monk, non-official, had a clarity that even the great arhats could not match. His words undid your logic. His questions pierced through pride. He was kind, but unshakably sharp. At last the Buddha turned to Manjushri, the bodhisattva of wisdom, and Manjushri, without hesitation, said, "I will go." So Manjushri entered the city, accompanied by heavenly beings, monks and devas. He found Vimalakirti reclining on a simple bed beneath a flowering tree. His eyes were calm, his illness invisible, his presence unmistakable. Manjushri bowed. "Venerable one," he said, "how should a bodhisattva view the world?" A simple question. And Vimalakirti answered not with poetry, but with paradox. A bodhisattva views the world as a magician views an illusion, as a dream, as a mirage, as a bubble on water. Manjushri asked again, "What is the root of this illness?" Vimalakirti replied, "The root of my sickness is the sickness of all beings. When they are healed, I will be healed too." And then he began to teach, not with lectures, but with reversals. He said a bodhisattva must live in the world without being trapped by it, must speak without attachment to words, must enter duality in order to transcend it. His home became a Dharma hall, his bed a throne of emptiness. Then came the final deepest question. Manjushri asked, What is the ultimate teaching of non-duality? One by one, the assembled bodhisattvas gave answers, each profound, each poetic. They spoke of emptiness, of no birth and no death, of neither here nor there, of neither self nor other. Each spoke in turn, until all had spoken. Then they turned to Vimalakirti and asked, "What is your answer?" Vimalakirti looked at them, smiled, and said, "Nothing." He remained completely silent. No gesture, no word, just presence. And in that moment, the hall fell still. Even the wind paused at the edge of the window. And the bodhisattvas understood, because that, his silence, was the answer. Beyond yes and no, beyond concepts, beyond even the word beyond. Only direct knowing, unspoken and complete. Commentary. The Vimalakirti Sutra is not just a scripture, it is a mirror, held up to the part of us that clings to roles, to robes, to rank, to rhetoric. It reminds us, wisdom is not a matter of appearance, and truth is not always spoken. Vimalakirti was not a monk, but he understood Dharma more deeply than most. He owned property, but was not owned by it. He lived among crowds, but dwelled in emptiness. He used language, but was not trapped by it. And when the time came to speak of non-duality, he let silence do the speaking. Sometimes, silence is escape. But sometimes, it is clarity, not a refusal, but a revelation. A silence so full, it says everything. There's a Zen saying, when the mouth is closed, the Dharma speaks most clearly. This is what Vimalakirti embodied. The wordless transmission. The truth beyond fingers pointing to moons. In our world, we often rush to speak, to fill the space, to define, to prove. But Vimalakirti teaches, when we stop grasping, when we stop arranging words like armor, what remains is presence. The silence was not empty, it was alive. It was not passive, it was the roar of no self. It dismantled even the idea of someone giving an answer, and left only this. You don't have to be a monk to wake up. You don't have to renounce your life. You have to see through it, and then live with depth, with clarity, with compassion, from within the illusion, while no longer fooled by it. Vimalakirti's room is still here. Every moment you stop trying to win the argument. Every time you stop needing to prove you're wise. Every time you rest in the space before thought. You are sitting beside him, and you are silent too. In one hand, he carries a book, the Prajnaparamita Sutra, the perfection of wisdom. In the other, he wields a sword, long, luminous, and aflame with clarity. He rides a lion, not to show power, but to symbolize the fearlessness of insight. This is Manjushri, the bodhisattva of wisdom, where Avalokiteshvara brings compassion, where Samantabhadra brings vow and action. Manjushri brings the sharp, radiant truth. His name means gentle glory, but his wisdom is not soft. It does not comfort. It cuts. It slices through illusion with the precision of a blade honed on silence. The sword he carries is not for battle. It is for discernment. It separates appearance from reality, self from no self, thought from knowing. It reveals what we are too afraid to see and too free not to see. In the old sutras, it is said that Manjushri's wisdom is so sharp, he was enlightened before the Buddhas of the past. He is the eternal teenager of the Mahayana pantheon, ever young, ever clear, ever unburdened by delusion. Where others hesitate, Manjushri speaks. Where others follow rules, Manjushri asks why. Where others cling to views, Manjushri lets go, again and again and again. One day a monk asked him, "What is the nature of ultimate reality?" And Manjushri drew his sword in the air, then lowered it slowly, as if slicing through something invisible. That was his answer. Because words can't always hold wisdom. Sometimes it must be shown. In Zen temples, the figure of Manjushri is often placed behind the Roshi's seat, not as decoration, but as a reminder that true teaching must be rooted in clarity, that every word spoken should come from a place that has already cut through ego, opinion, attachment. The teacher, like Manjushri, must see clearly before they speak. There is a famous koan. A young monk full of doctrine said to the master, "I've memorized the Heart Sutra. I understand emptiness. There is no I, no ear, no mind, no path, no attainment." The master pointed to a bowl of rice and said, "Then eat, because understanding is not the point. Living is." This is what Manjushri teaches, wisdom that is not locked in scriptures, but embodied, applied, lived. The sword is not aggressive, it is necessary to wake us, to free us, to carve away the clinging and the confusion until only truth remains. Not an idea, but a mirror with no dust. There's a story told in the mountains. A disciple sat meditating, trying to silence his thoughts. He came to Manjushri in prayer and asked, "Please cut away my illusions." That night, in a dream, Manjushri appeared. He said nothing, only lifted his sword and placed it gently on the disciple's shoulder, not to strike, but to remind him, the blade is not outside you. It is within. Commentary. Manjushri does not give you answers. He gives you the means to see for yourself. That is his wisdom, not dogma, but discernment. Not belief, but perception stripped of filter. The sword cuts two ways. It cuts through ignorance, but also through comfort. It forces us to ask, what have I built my life on? And what happens when that is no longer solid? Can I let go? Can I breathe? Even when the ground beneath me vanishes. Wisdom is not knowing more. It is needing less. It is silence that doesn't need applause. It is clarity that does not waver in the dark. It is the ability to sit in confusion and not flinch, to stand before illusion and not bow, to name what is and let go of what is not. The lion Manjushri rides is not a beast of war. It is the mind that has been tamed. The roar is no longer fear. It is the roar of reality unfiltered. The courage to face things as they are. There's a quiet danger in spiritual life. We want wisdom to feel good, to validate us, to comfort the parts of us that ache. But Manjushri reminds us, true wisdom will sometimes hurt. It will dismantle the story we've told ourselves. It will whisper, "You are not who you think you are." And if we listen, the story ends and life begins. In your own practice, the sword appears in many forms. The question you can't answer. The moment you realize you've been wrong, the teacher who looks you in the eye and says nothing because anything they say would only get in the way. That is the sword, cutting gently, so you can see clearly. You don't have to fear it. You have to wield it in kindness, in honesty, in the decision to no longer live half asleep. When you chant, chant with the sword. When you bow, bow with the sword. When you love, love with the sword. Not to harm, but to see clearly what love is. Because love without wisdom is sentiment, and wisdom without love is cold. But together, they are Manjushri and Avalokiteshvara, and the path itself. With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. A monk once traveled alone through a deep forest. He'd been walking for days, through mud, through heat, through cold rain. He carried nothing but a worn robe, a begging bowl, and a satchel with a single stone inside. Why the stone? He could not say, only that a teacher once gave it to him and said, "Carry this until you understand its weight." The monk took it literally, and dutifully he carried the stone. At first, it seemed like nothing, but as the months passed, over hills, across rivers, through deserts, it began to burden him. His back ached, his hands calloused, his mind grew resentful. "Why must I carry this?" he muttered one evening, dropping beside a creek. He looked at the stone, round, dark, unremarkable. A simple weight, and yet it had become everything. That night, he slept beneath the stars, and he dreamed. In the dream, he stood in an endless field beneath a vast open sky. He held the stone tightly, afraid to drop it, afraid he might lose something important. Then a voice, calm and distant, whispered, "Are you carrying the stone, or is the stone carrying you?" He awoke just before dawn, heart racing. The sky above him was pale and soft, wide and light. He looked at the stone again and understood. This is the story of thoughts, identity, and the illusion of burdens, how what we cling to becomes our weight. Commentary. Many of us carry stones, regret, shame, an old story someone once told us about who we are, a wound we've wrapped ourselves around for so long it feels like identity. We think we're being strong, but strength is not clinging. It's knowing when to let go. The monk carried the stone because he trusted his teacher. But trust without inquiry is like walking in darkness without asking if there's a door. His real practice began not when he received the stone, but when he questioned it. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from attachment, even to things that seem noble, tradition, memory, belief, self-image. We say this is who I am, but who is saying it? And what happens when the self no longer fits? The stone was not the problem. The gripping was. The fear of what it meant to be without it. We carry pain from the past because we think dropping it means forgetting. We carry roles that no longer serve us because we think they are us. We carry anger because we think it protects us. But a clenched fist cannot hold the sky. Later that day, the monk stood on a hilltop and watched the clouds pass. He held the stone in both hands, not angrily, not resentfully, just with awareness, and then he set it gently on the ground, not thrown, not discarded, just returned. A breeze touched his robe. The clouds shifted. He took his next step, and it felt like the first. In that moment, he realized the sky had always been there, unbothered, unburdened, vast, and that somewhere along the way, he had confused being grounded with being weighed down. This is the nature of the mind. It can be like a stone, heavy, fixated, stuck in the past, or like the sky, open, vast, always able to hold the weather without becoming it. The monk never told others to drop their stones. He simply told this story and ended it with a question. What are you carrying that is carrying you? So, pause today. Look gently at the weight in your hands, your heart, your mind, and ask yourself, do I still need this to walk? Or have I mistaken the stone for my path? At the edge of a temple, near the foot of a quiet hill, there lay a stone basin. It had no inscription, no offerings placed before it, no tourists gathered around, but every monk in the monastery knew its story. And when a novice was struggling, that's where the teacher would send them. Go sit by the broken bowl, they'd say, and that was enough. Long ago, the bowl had been whole, carved from a single piece of granite, smooth, strong, revered. It stood in the center of the temple courtyard, used for rituals and alms. Every morning it was filled with clear water. Every evening it was emptied and washed. Then came a winter earthquake, not violent, but enough. A hairline fracture, then a second quake weeks later, and the bowl split down the middle, cracked clean through. It no longer held water. Some said to discard it. Others wanted to repair it. But the abbot, an old woman with kind eyes and a quiet presence, said, "Leave it as it is, let it teach." And so it remained. Years passed. Moss gathered inside the broken seam. Rain pooled only briefly before slipping through the gap. The bowl no longer functioned, but it was not discarded, because in stillness, it began to reveal something else. Monks would sit beside it, touch the cool edge, trace the break with reverent fingers, and slowly, quietly begin to understand. Wholeness does not mean unbroken. The world teaches us to fear breaking, to grieve what cannot be fixed, to measure our worth by our usefulness. But the Dharma invites a deeper seeing, a truth whispered by that silent stone. You are not what you hold. You are what you are. Even when you hold nothing at all. The broken bowl was no longer useful, but it was still itself, still stone, still shaped by care, still part of the temple. Its crack did not remove its belonging. One day, a monk sat beside it after losing his voice. He had been a teacher, a singer of chants. Now, silent, he felt useless, forgotten. Until the abbot brought him to the bowl and simply said, "It doesn't hold water, but it still holds truth." And then she bowed. This is the parable of function and form. So often, we confuse our value with our utility. We think, I can't do what I used to. I've lost my role. I am broken. But even a bowl that no longer holds water can still hold presence, still offer reflection, still rest in the sun, still teach. In Buddhism, there is a phrase, form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. It appears in the Heart Sutra, one of the most profound teachings. On the surface, it sounds like a riddle, but it points to this: what you are is not just your shape, and what breaks doesn't define what remains. Imagine your roles are bowls: parent, artist, teacher, helper, listener. When one cracks, you may feel like you've lost something essential, but you haven't lost you. You are still present, still capable of love, still part of the whole, just as the broken bowl is still part of the temple. One evening, a novice accidentally dropped a cup. It shattered. He looked up in fear, but the teacher only said, "It was already broken." The boy's eyes filled with confusion. The teacher continued, "Everything we use is already broken. We just don't see it yet, so we love it while we have it. And when it breaks, we bow. To live with this awareness is not to be gloomy. It is to be free, to care for things deeply, but not cling to them desperately. To understand that even in brokenness, there can be peace." Commentary. The broken bowl reminds us that identity is not function, that worth is not erased by loss, that something can be cracked and still belong, still matter, still offer presence. There is a time to serve, and there is a time to simply be, to be still, to be soft, to be a presence others can sit beside. Like the bowl, like the monk with no voice, like the abbot who teaches with silence. You are not just the things you do. You are not just the roles you fill. You are not just the tasks you complete. When those fall away, when something cracks, what's left? That's the real practice. That's the part of you that watches, that breathes, that remains. Sit beside your own cracked places, not to fix, but to witness. Let them speak. Let them soften you. Let them remind you that even broken things reflect the sky. Even a bowl that holds no water can hold the Dharma. In a mountainside monastery carved from stone and silence, there lived a monk known for his rage. He was not a novice, not undisciplined, not cruel, but when the fire came, it came fast, like wind through dry leaves, like lightning on still water. His name was Anjan. Years before, he had left behind a life of status and noise. A wealthy merchant's son, he had walked away from gold, from servants, from praise. He shaved his head, took the robe, entered the path, and tried to be still. But stillness did not come easily. Not for him. While other monks sat like stones in meditation, Anjan's thoughts raced. While others bowed gently in morning light, his mind bristled at small slights, careless words, slow movements. He clenched his teeth, gripped his mala beads too tightly, snapped at those who asked too many questions, and always afterward, he regretted it. One morning, a young monk accidentally spilled tea on his robes. Anjan stood. His voice rose like thunder in the sacred hall. "You call this mindfulness?" The novice bowed deeply, trembling, but the damage had been done. Silence followed, heavy and sharp. That evening, the abbot summoned Anjan. He did not scold, did not instruct. He simply handed Anjan a small, empty bowl. "Hold this," he said, and walk to the old pine tree at the edge of the cliff. Sit there until the bowl is full. Anjan blinked. "The bowl is empty." The abbot nodded. "Fill it with stillness." So Anjan went. The pine tree stood crooked against the sky, its needles sharp as whispers, its trunk weathered by time. Anjan sat beneath it, bowl in lap, confusion in heart. How could he fill a bowl with something that couldn't be seen? Hours passed. Birds called. Clouds shifted. His legs ached. Still the bowl remained. Empty. Still his thoughts churned. This is foolish. I should be studying. They're laughing at me back at the monastery. The fire stirred again, that old familiar heat. He stood up, ready to leave, but paused, and for the first time, he looked. At the bowl, at the tree, at the sky opening quietly beyond the cliffs, and something softened, not a release, but a noticing that his mind was loud and the world was not. He sat again, not to succeed, not to prove, but just to be. Days passed. He returned each morning, sometimes with anger, sometimes with peace, sometimes with tears, always with the bowl. He began to notice his breath, not control it, just notice. He began to feel his thoughts, not as commands, but as weather. They came, they went. One day, a beetle crawled across the bowl's rim. Anjan did not flinch, did not swat it away. He watched it, felt its tiny weight, its gentle effort, and whispered, "Thank you." Weeks later, he returned to the abbot. The bowl was still empty, but his eyes were not. They were clear, software still. The abbot smiled. "Did you bring what I asked for?" Anjan bowed. "I did not fill the bowl with stillness, but I emptied it of everything else." This is the story of the angry monk, and how fire, when met with space, becomes warmth. Commentary. Anger is not evil. It is energy. It is fire. And fire can cook food or burn down temples. The Dharma does not teach suppression. It teaches transformation. Anjan did not erase his anger. He sat with it. He saw its roots: fear, pride, expectation, and in seeing it clearly, he softened. You cannot calm your mind by force. You cannot force a bowl to fill with stillness. You can only stop stirring the water and wait until clarity returns on its own. We all carry bowls, and we all try to fill them with achievement, with reaction, with rightness, with control, but the wisest among us know. The real work is emptying, not to lose, but to make space. There's a Zen saying, "Let go or be dragged." You don't have to destroy your fire. Just give it space. Let it breathe. Let it teach you what stillness really means. And remember, stillness does not mean absence of movement. It means absence of resistance. Like a tree that sways but does not break. Like a bowl that reflects the sky because it does not try to. Let your bowl be empty, and in that emptiness, find peace. As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. Long ago, in the shadow of the Mahabharata range, there lived a young man named Jorin. He was clever, quick-witted, strong of voice and proud of heart. But Jorin carried something deeper, an anger that lived just beneath his skin, not always cruel, but sharp, like a wind that turned cold without warning. One day, after an argument with his father, Jorin stormed out of their stone cottage and began climbing the mountain trail above their village. "I don't need anyone," he shouted at the trees. But the forest only rustled in reply. He climbed higher until the air turned thin and the path narrowed to rock and dust. At the highest ridge, he stopped and yelled into the vastness below. "I hate you!" The words bounced off stone, and to his surprise, the mountain answered, "I hate you! I hate you!" The echo rang out across the cliffs, his own voice thrown back at him. Jorin blinked. He had never heard the mountain speak before. Curious, he cupped his hands again. "You're a fool!" The echo answered, "You're a fool, a fool!" Now he laughed nervously. Then, hesitantly, he tried, "I love you." And again the valley responded, "I love you. Love you." His voice returned, but changed by the silence it passed through. Jorin stood there for a long time, the cold wind tugging at his sleeves, the vastness of the world pressing in. And then he turned back down the path, but quieter than before. This is the story of karma, of how what we send out returns. Commentary. In Sanskrit, karma means action, but not just physical action. Also thought, speech, intention. Each one plants a seed. And those seeds, over time, bear fruit, not as punishment, not as reward, but as response. Like an echo. The mountain did not decide to insult Jorin. It simply returned what was given. This is the truth of karma. The world is not judging you. It is reflecting you. The Buddha once said, "With our thoughts, we make the world." Speak or act with a pure mind, and happiness follows you, like a shadow that never leaves. Most people think karma is about fate, but it's not. Karma is not what happens to you. It's how you move, and what that movement shapes in return. Jorin didn't change overnight, but that moment on the mountain stayed with him. He began to notice the way his words shaped the people around him, how a harsh joke left someone smaller, how a small kindness lifted a room. He didn't always get it right, but now he listened for the echo. One day, years later, Jorin stood at the base of the same mountain. His son, angry about a broken toy, was shouting at the sky. Jorin placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Careful, little one. The mountain hears." The boy looked up, puzzled, and Jorin smiled. "Speak gently, even when no one answers right away." Because life is an echo. Sometimes it comes back loud, sometimes soft, sometimes years later, sometimes not until your children feel it, but it always returns. So what will you shout into the valley? What kind of world will your words shape? Be mindful of your echoes, because one day you'll hear them again. A fisherman rose each morning before dawn. He lived at the edge of a still bay, where mist rolled in like a soft breath and the world moved slowly. Each day, he cast his net into the water, not with force, not with haste, just one gentle sweep into the unknown. Sometimes the catch was good. Other times, the net came up nearly empty. But he never cursed the sea. He simply folded the net, sat quietly by the shore, and waited for light. One morning, as he gathered the net, he noticed something strange. Tangled in the threads was not a fish, but a stone, smooth, dark, heavy. He tried to shake it loose, but it wouldn't budge. So he tugged, pulled, cut a thread. But the more he worked, the more tangled the net became. What once was open and fluid now clung to itself in knots. The sun rose, the tide shifted, and the fisherman sat with his hands full of threads and tension. A monk walking nearby saw him and paused. She watched for a while, then sat beside him. They sat in silence. Then she asked, "Why are you still holding the stone?" The fisherman looked down, surprised. "I don't know," he said. "It was just there. I didn't ask for it, but now I can't let go." The monk nodded slowly, then said, "The mind is like your net, and thoughts are like what it catches. Some nourish us, some weigh us down. The skill is not in holding tighter, the skill is in knowing when to let go." The fisherman blinked. He looked at the stone again, noticed its weight, its stillness, and then, without force, he simply opened his hand. The stone dropped, and in the silence that followed, the net softened. This is the teaching. The mind is always casting, always sweeping the depths of the world. And each moment, it brings something up. A memory, a judgment, a craving, a fear, a plan, a worry. You didn't ask for it, but it's there. And what you do next is the practice. In meditation, you begin to notice the stones. You sit quietly and the mind casts its net. Up come thoughts, endless, streaming. Some small and harmless, some sticky and sharp, some heavy and loud, and the habit is to grab them, to pull them closer, to replay the argument, to solve the unsolvable, to panic over the future, to narrate the self. But the teaching is simple. Open your hand, let it drop. Return to the breath, again and again. This is not avoidance. It is freedom. It is not denial. It is discernment. Because not every thought deserves your grip. Some are just passing fish. Some are driftwood. And some are stones that were never yours to carry. The mind wants to collect, wants to store, wants to turn everything into me and mine. But the Dharma says, there is no need to fill your net with every thought. Let the sea give and take. Let the net remain open. Let stillness return. There is a Zen saying, let your thoughts come and go like clouds in the sky. Do not hold on to any of them. And another, you cannot stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. The fisherman became a student of this practice. He still rose early, still cast his net, but he no longer feared the weight of unwanted things. He had learned to pause, to breathe, to release. One day, another fisherman asked him, "Why do you never struggle anymore?" And he replied, "Because I stopped thinking the stone had to be mine." Commentary. The mind is a marvel, but also a trickster. It offers thoughts like a street vendor offering wares. Hear, it says. Worry about this. Remember this insult. Fear this loss. Fix this person. Solve this world. You don't need to buy everything it sells. You can say, not today, and return to the silence underneath. This parable teaches non-attachment to thought, not by suppression, but by seeing clearly. This is just a stone. It came up in my net, and now I let it go. Sometimes you'll catch a golden truth, a loving memory, a calm realization. Hold it gently and let it go too, because even beauty becomes burden when clutched too long. In the end, all thoughts pass, like tides, like clouds, like weather across the sky of mind. You are not the net. You are not the catch. You are the sea and the stillness beneath. The road to Kusinara was quiet, not silent, never that, but filled with the hush of a world preparing to let go. Leaves rustled without wind. Birds called, but softly, like they too were watching. The monks walked in silence, their robes brushing against dry earth. And at the front, supported by Ananda's steady hand, walked the Buddha. His body was frail. The form that had once walked hundreds of miles barefoot, that had sat unshaken through storms, through temptation, through hunger, now trembled with every step. His ribs showed like lines drawn in dust. His shoulders drooped like branches in drought. But his eyes were clear, bright, as steady as the day he left the palace gates. They reached a grove of sal trees on the outskirts of the small village of Kusinara. The Buddha paused. Here, he said softly, let us rest here. This is a good place. The sal trees stood in silent formation, tall, pale, and blooming out of season, their white blossoms drifting like snow. Some monks whispered that the trees had awakened too, that nature itself knew what was coming. Ananda laid down a folded robe beneath his teacher's head. The others formed a soft ring around them, as if holding the space open, sacred and still. The Buddha reclined on his right side, in the lion's posture, facing west. His breathing was shallow but steady. The light of the setting sun turned the dust gold. It is time, he said. The body is like a worn cart, held together by straps and will. It has served its purpose. Let it be. Ananda knelt beside him, eyes already full of tears. You always said not to cling, he whispered. But I don't know how not to. The Buddha turned his gaze to his beloved attendant. You have served with a heart free of self, Ananda, for 25 years, never once wavering. You have been my shadow in daylight, my shelter in storm. You are not losing me. You are gaining the path. Ananda bowed, his forehead to the earth. But the world will feel so empty without your footsteps. The Buddha smiled gently. Then fill it with your own. Word spread through Kusinara like a breeze stirring dry leaves. The Blessed One is near death. Men and women came with offerings, not of gold, but of rice, of garlands, of silence. Some stood at a distance, unable to speak. Others stepped forward and bowed low, their heads pressed to the soil. A blacksmith named Kunda came, humbly bearing a meal. A dish of mushrooms and tender greens, prepared with utmost care. The Buddha accepted it with gratitude and blessed the man. Later, as pain overtook him, he turned to Ananda. Tell Kunda this, he said. He should feel no regret. 2 meals in my life stand out. The first, offered by Sujata, gave strength for awakening. This one gives strength for release. Both are sacred. Both are complete. Ananda nodded, committing the words to memory. The sun dipped low. The monks gathered beneath the sal trees, their hearts heavy. Some sat in deep meditation. Others simply watched their teacher, afraid to blink. The blossoms continued to fall gently, like the breath of the world slowing down. The Buddha opened his eyes. Perhaps some of you think the teacher is gone. We have no one to guide us now, but that is not so. His voice was calm, though each word required effort. You must be your own lamps. Be a refuge unto yourselves. Take the Dharma as your island. Do not look outside for shelter. A long silence followed. Then he added, with clarity that cut through every grief, all compounded things are subject to decay. Strive with diligence. He closed his eyes and entered deep absorption, one state after another, like ripples fading across a pond. First through the 4 jhanas, then through the formless states, boundless space, boundless consciousness, neither perception nor non-perception, and then beyond. His breath slowed, then faded, then stopped. But the silence that followed was not empty, it was whole. The sal blossoms fell across his body. One landed gently on his brow. Ananda did not cry at first. No one did. The stillness was too vast. It reached into them. It opened a space that no sorrow could fill. A hush settled over the grove, deeper than sleep, deeper than night. Even the birds fell quiet. Even the wind held back. And then, as if cued by the moment, the sal trees swayed. Not with breeze, but with knowing, with reverence. The Blessed One had passed into parinirvana. They sat for hours, no words, no movement, just presence. Some monks touched their foreheads to the ground. Others sat upright, spine like a mountain, anchoring the grief in stillness. When finally the moon rose, round and full, like a soft eye watching from above, Ananda stood. He is gone, he said softly, voice breaking. No, whispered another monk, a younger one. He is everywhere now. The cremation took place days later. They built a pyre of fragrant sandalwood, wrapped his body in layers of clean cloth and placed it with care. 8 royal families sent emissaries to claim relics, and a solemn agreement was reached. The remains would be divided equally, enshrined in stupas across the land. But the true relic was not ash. It was the teaching, the 4 noble truths, the eightfold path, the silence behind the breath, the calm behind the storm, the truth that lives on not in memory, but in practice. In time, monks and nuns would walk for weeks to reach that sal grove. Some would come in silence. Others would chant, but all would feel something shift as they stepped beneath the trees. They would sit on the earth where the Buddha last rested and listen, not for sound, but for understanding. And sometimes, if the wind was just right, they would hear it, strive with diligence. Ananda, as the years passed, returned often. He would sit beneath the very tree where he had knelt that night. He would run his hand along its bark, worn smooth now by the prayers of many. He would remember the final gaze, the final breath. and the words that lingered after everything else had passed away. All things that arise must pass, but the path is timeless. And in the stillness there would be no fear, only peace. And so that is how he left, not in triumph, not in spectacle, but in peace, wrapped in stillness, under trees that bloomed out of season, as if even nature bowed to the one who no longer clung. And in that final moment, the world did not end. It simply continued, quieter, wiser, and forever changed. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next story. Every morning at 6:15, she opened the curtains. The light crept in slowly, soft and golden, and the photo on the mantel caught it just right. It was old, sepia-toned, edges curled like leaves in autumn. A man in uniform, smiling, handsome, still young. Her husband, gone now for 17 years. Miriam never moved the photo. It stayed on the same spot. Third tile from the right, 2 inches from the lamp. She didn't talk to it, didn't cry over it. She simply saw it. Every day, grief for her had stopped being a storm. It had become weather, something you dress for, something you feel without needing to fight. Once, her granddaughter asked, "Why don't you get rid of that old photo? You have better ones on your phone." Miriam just smiled. That one isn't for looking. It's for remembering. Her husband had died in his sleep. No warnings, no pain, just silence. She found him in the morning, hands still curled as if holding a dream. She didn't scream, didn't collapse. She sat beside him, held his hand and whispered, "Thank you." People told her to be strong. She didn't try. She simply continued. At the temple nearby, the monks would speak of impermanence, of how everything changes, how attachment creates suffering. Miriam understood this. Not as an idea, but as a reality. She loved her husband deeply, but she did not clutch him. Even in his absence, she let him be gone. And in doing so, he never truly left. There's a Zen teaching. To hold a butterfly, you must open your palm. Miriam didn't keep a shrine, didn't tell his story over and over. She just lived in a way that would make him proud. She tended the garden they once planted together. She drank the coffee he used to brew. She folded his shirts one last time and gave them away. Not because she stopped loving him, but because she didn't want her love to become a cage. One day, a neighbor lost her husband. She came to Miriam, eyes red, voice shaking. "I don't know how to live without him." Miriam poured tea, sat with her, said nothing at first, then quietly offered, "You don't live without him. You live with the part of him that still breathes in you." The neighbor sobbed. And Miriam did not stop her. She just placed a hand on hers and let it be. Love doesn't end. It changes shape. And grief, too, is a form of love. One that knows how to bow. Miriam is older now, hands soft with age. Memories flickering at the edges, but she still opens the curtains each morning. Still lets the light find the photo, not to bring him back, but to let him go again, gently, lovingly, without holding. In the garden behind the old temple, there stood a stone Buddha. He had no golden crown, no ornate altar, no flowers at his feet, just stone dash, weathered by rain, wind, and decades of silence. Moss gathered at the base, vines crept along his arm, birds landed on his head without reverence. And still he sat, eyes closed, hands folded, unmoved. Generations of monks came and went. Some swept the garden path, others meditated nearby, but few paid the Buddha much mind. Time had dulled his features. No one prayed to him. Tourists ignored him for the bright lacquered statues inside the main hall. He was just there, part of the background. Then one day a child arrived. She was the daughter of a villager who came to deliver vegetables. While her father spoke to the cook, the girl wandered through the herb garden, past the bell tower, until she saw the statue. Something about it made her stop. Maybe it was the silence, maybe it was the stillness, or maybe it was the dust. She reached out and touched the cheek of the statue. It felt cold, rough, real. "Who is this?" she asked when her father returned. The cook chuckled. "Just an old Buddha. No one important." But the abbot, who had been nearby, turned and smiled. "No one important?" he said softly. "Then perhaps he is teaching more than we realize." The next day, the girl returned with a cloth. She wiped the statue's face gently. The dust didn't all come off. Some of it was too stubborn, too deep. Still, she came again the next day, and the next. She brought water, polished one ear, cleaned the fold of the robe. Not to make it shine, but to see what was underneath. Each day, the Buddha seemed to return a little more, not just to sight, but to presence. Soon, other villagers took notice. A few offered flowers. One man brought a small bowl of rice. The monks watched, a bit puzzled. "This statue has always been here," said one. "Why now?" The abbot simply nodded toward the girl. "Because someone remembered him." That evening, during the Dharma talk, the abbot told a story. "Long ago," he began, "there was a temple in Thailand that housed a clay Buddha. Plain, ordinary, but during renovations a crack formed, and when monks investigated, they found gold beneath the clay." He paused. For years no one knew. Dust had hidden what was always shining. The monks were quiet. They knew he wasn't just talking about statues. "We forget," the abbot continued, "that beneath the dust of routine, of failure, of labels and years, there is gold." The girl didn't understand the full teaching, but she understood enough that something once ignored could be sacred, that what others pass by might be worth sitting with. Months passed. The Buddha still wore dust. But now it was brushed gently, not erased, just respected. His cracks weren't patched, his moss not scraped away, because the lesson was not perfection. It was presence. Years later, the girl grew older, left for school, moved to the city. But every time she returned home, she visited the statue, bowed, closed her eyes, and sat. One spring, she returned to find a small plaque had been placed beside the Buddha. It read, "Covered in dust, still whole." And beneath it, a haiku, "Stone does not forget, even as moss takes its hold." The silence remains. In the end, the statue never moved. never spoke, never sparkled, but it changed those who looked long enough, not by demanding attention, but by waiting patiently for someone to remember that beneath the dust, nothing was ever missing. In the still hush before dawn, the palace of Kapilavastu stirred with the soft rustle of silks and the distant rhythm of footfalls on marble. The world outside was already unfolding, but within the gilded walls where Prince Siddhartha lived, every petal was sheltered from the wind of suffering. No wrinkles marred the faces of the attendants. No cries of illness echoed through the halls. No one spoke of death. His father, King Suddhodana, had ensured that his son knew only ease, beauty, and delight. The astrologers had predicted that the young prince would become either a great king or a holy man who would renounce the world. Fearing the latter, the king built a world without shadows. Flowers were changed before they wilted. Servants were chosen for their youth and radiance. Pain was not allowed to show its face. But truth, like the sun, cannot be hidden forever, and yearning, like a seed buried deep, will reach for the light even through stone. On a day shaped like any other, Siddhartha requested to ride beyond the palace gates. He was 29, cloaked in fine fabric and surrounded by careful illusions. Yet something inside him whispered of incompleteness, like a bell struck in the distance that would not stop ringing. There was a tightness in his chest he could not name, a hollowness that no feast or dance could fill. The charioteer Channa guided the prince through the streets of the city. The morning was bright, the people beautiful, the air filled with jasmine. Musicians played in courtyards, children laughed in sunbeams, all seemed perfect. But then the illusion cracked. At the edge of a quiet street, they saw a man hunched and trembling. His hair was white, his back bowed by years. His skin sagged like parchment, and his hands clutched a stick. He moved slowly, as though the air itself had thickened around him. Siddhartha leaned forward. "Channa," he asked, "what is wrong with that man?" "That is old age, my lord," Channa replied. "It comes to all who live long. The body weakens, the bones bend, the senses dull. No one escapes it." The prince stared at the man as he passed, the way he paused to catch his breath, the way his eyes seemed clouded with time. Siddhartha's hands gripped the side of the chariot. "Will this come to me?" he asked. "Yes, my lord, to you, to me, to all." Siddhartha fell silent. The first veil had lifted. The garden he had lived in was not eternal. Beneath the fragrance was decay. Beneath the music was silence. The next day, restless and inwardly stirred, he asked to go again. And again the world revealed another layer. As they turned a corner, Siddhartha saw a man collapsed by the roadside. His face was contorted in pain, his skin grey and clammy. His limbs twisted unnaturally, and he coughed as if his lungs were full of fire. "And this?" Siddhartha asked. "This is sickness, my lord," Channa said gently. "It strikes without warning. It takes the strong and lays them low. There is no rank or title that shields against it." The prince watched as a woman tried to cool the man's brow, her eyes wide with helplessness. A child clung to her skirts. Siddhartha turned away, but the image would not leave him. How many in his palace had hidden such suffering behind closed doors? How much of the world had he not seen? On the third day, the air hung heavy with heat. a solemn hush drifted through the streets. Siddhartha and Channa followed the sound of quiet chanting and saw a procession winding through the alleys. Men carried a shrouded form on a wooden bier, garlands laid across it. Behind them, mourners walked with bowed heads, incense curling in the air. "Is he asleep?" the prince asked, though he already knew. "He is dead, my lord," Channa replied. "This is the fate of all who are born." The prince felt something deep within him fracture. He watched the faces of the mourners, their grief like a tide with no shore. The man on the bier would never speak again, never eat, never laugh. All that he was had ended. And this comes to everyone. Everyone, my lord. The rich, the poor, the wise, the foolish. Siddhartha did not speak on the way back. The chariot wheels hummed against the stone, but his thoughts made no sound. The world had split open. Beneath the silks, beneath the pleasures, there was something hollow, a truth too vast to ignore. He lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. His wife, Yasodhara, slept beside him. Their son, Rahula, breathed softly in the next room. And yet, peace evaded him. He saw the old man, the sick man, the corpse. He saw them behind every smile, beneath every ornament. He knew now that no palace could protect against time. No love could shield against loss. No beauty could outpace decay. And then, on the fourth day, they rode out once more. This time, they saw a man in saffron robes, walking barefoot along the path. His eyes were calm, his steps steady. He carried no gold, wore no jewelry. His face bore the lines of both suffering and peace. "Who is that?" Siddhartha asked. "A seeker, my lord," Channa said. "One who has renounced the world to find the path beyond birth and death. One who walks in search of freedom." Siddhartha watched him until he vanished into the distance. No guards flanked him, no luxuries trailed behind, and yet something about the man radiated a serenity deeper than anything Siddhartha had known. That night, the prince stood at the edge of his sleeping son's cradle, not daring to wake him. He touched the boy's soft cheek, his heart torn between two loves, the love of his family and the love of truth. He stepped into the garden one last time, its scent bittersweet. He bowed before the moonlit statue of his ancestors, and with each step toward the gate, he shed a piece of his former self, his earrings, his sword, his silks. He left that night, into the forest, into silence, into the unknown. The four sights had shattered his illusion, but they had also opened the gate. And on the other side of that gate was the beginning of a path. The path that would change the world. As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins. The temple's library held thousands of texts, worn scrolls, faded sutras, ink-smudged commentaries written by hands long returned to dust. Monks came to read by daylight when the sun filtered through paper screens, and the scent of old parchment warmed the air. But one monk always came at night. Her name was May. She was quiet, thoughtful, the kind who listened longer than she spoke. Each evening, after her chores were done, she would carry a single candle into the library and read until wax melted low. One night during the rainy season, The wind howled across the hillside. Storm clouds swallowed the moon. Still, May entered the library, lit her candle, sat cross-legged before a scroll on emptiness. The flame flickered with every gust, but she kept reading. Outside, an owl perched in the eaves, white-feathered, wide-eyed, still. It watched her, unblinking. As the wind swirled harder, the flame bent. Then it went out. Darkness, total. May did not panic. She closed her eyes and waited. After a moment, she noticed a soft rustling overhead, feathers, then stillness again. She opened her eyes, and though she could see nothing, she sensed the owl was still there. Watching, she whispered aloud, "How do you see in this?" As if in answer, a line from the sutra she had just read returned to her. "The eye that sees true is not of flesh or flame, but of calm presence in the dark." She smiled softly. Perhaps the lesson wasn't in the candlelight, but in its absence. The next day, she spoke with the abbot. "Master," she asked, "why do we fear the dark so much?" He thought for a while. "Because we trust only what the eye can see. But true wisdom," he said, "often waits in the dark." He continued, "The owl does not light a lantern. It simply sees." From that night on, May still brought her candle, but she also learned to sit after it burned out, not to read, but to observe her breath, her thoughts, her discomfort. And slowly the dark became a teacher. Other monks noticed. May was calmer, slower to speak, gentler when correcting mistakes, as if she no longer needed light to know what mattered. One night, a novice joined her. He fidgeted, grumbled at the dark. "I can't see anything," he said. May smiled. "That's the beginning," she said, "not the problem." There's a Zen saying, "Don't curse the dark, don't worship the light, become the eye that sees in both." The owl never flew down, never made a sound, but its lesson stayed with May until the end of her days. Sometimes, the truest clarity isn't found by shining more light, but by learning to sit still when the candle goes out. There was once a man who lived in poverty. His shoes were worn, his coat threadbare, his belly often empty, and his hands always calloused. But he had a friend, kind and wealthy, who loved him deeply. One day this friend came to visit. They shared a meal, laughed like children, and drank until the poor man fell asleep in contentment. Before leaving, the friend saw how hard the man's life had become. So he quietly took a jewel, a priceless, radiant stone, and stitched it inside the lining of the man's robe. He said nothing. He simply left the gift where it could not be lost. Years passed. The poor man wandered, worked, begged, slept beneath bridges and woke in alleyways. He remained convinced he had nothing, never knowing that a treasure was sewn into his own clothing. He suffered, all while wealth brushed against his ribs, all while forgetting what he already carried. Then one day the two friends met again, and when the rich man saw the state of his companion, he cried out, "Why have you lived this way? Don't you remember? I gave you everything. The jewel has been with you this whole time." The poor man froze. His hands trembled as he turned the robe inside out. And there, nestled in the seam, untouched and waiting, was the jewel This is a parable from the Lotus Sutra, and it is not about wealth, it is about Buddha nature. It is about the truth we already carry, but forget. The man is all of us, wandering, doubting, working endlessly to find meaning, purpose, belonging, thinking we must earn it, thinking we must seek it, never realizing we were born with the jewel. We never lacked it, we only forgot to look. Buddha nature is not something to gain. It is not granted to the worthy, it is already here, in the one who chants, in the one who steals, in the one who weeps in shame, in the one who laughs too loudly in the back of the zendo. The jewel shines equally. It does not discriminate. In Mahayana Buddhism, this parable is a teaching of Tathagatagarbha, the womb of Buddhahood. It means that all beings, no matter how lost, carry the seed of awakening, not as potential, but as reality. Already whole, already luminous, already stitched into the lining of our very being. The problem is not that we are broken. The problem is that we believe we are broken. And so we search, outside, in teachers, in techniques, in titles, in temporary comforts, all while the jewel sits quietly inside, waiting. There's a saying in Zen, don't seek the truth, only stop cherishing opinions. Because the more we chase, the farther we run from what is already still. In the story, the friend does not blame. He simply says, look. That is the role of the teacher, not to give you the jewel, but to remind you it's there, to show you the thread, to help you turn your robe inside out. Even your flaws are not flaws. They are fabric. Even your pain is not proof of lack. It is the tension in the thread that protects the jewel. Even your delusion is a path, if you let it lead you inward. The poor man's mistake wasn't laziness. It was forgetting his inheritance, just like us. We forget we are enough. We forget we are worthy. We forget that what we seek has always been with us. Buddhism is not about becoming holy. It is about remembering who you are, who you've always been, what cannot be taken from you, not by grief, not by failure, not by your own darkest thoughts. Sometimes people ask, but if I already have Buddha nature, why practice? And the answer is simple, to remember, to loosen the thread, to notice the glimmer, to stop walking past yourself like a stranger. Commentary. The jewel is not hard to find, but it is easy to overlook, because it does not shout. It does not sparkle in the usual light. It sits in the quietest part of you and waits for you to be still enough to feel it. You may not believe this yet. That's okay. Belief is not required. Only curiosity, only the courage to look inside the robe and ask, what if I am already whole? In a monastery garden, a novice once asked the teacher, where can I find the Buddha? The teacher pointed to the ground. Toes. Then to the novice's chest, heart. Then to the novice's eyes. Everywhere you see, but especially where you never thought to look. You have the jewel. So now, stop asking how to earn it. Start asking how to honor it. Live from it. Speak from it. Let it shape your steps. And when others forget their own jewels, remind them gently, just like the friend did, At the edge of a quiet village stood a grove of bamboo. Tall, slender, green like fresh thought. Children played between the stalks. Lovers carved initials in their husks. The wind passed through them like a flute, and they bent, bowed, never snapped. Even in the worst monsoons, when roofs were torn and trees cracked in two, the bamboo always remained, not by resisting, but by yielding. The villagers took comfort in them, the way they swayed without fear, the way they seemed to whisper, "It is okay to move with what comes." One year, a powerful storm swept through the valley, the kind that arrives with no warning, just a sudden hush, then a roar like sky breaking. Palm trees were flung sideways. The great banyan lost a limb, crops flattened, roofs lifted like paper, and yet in the morning light, the bamboo still stood, drenched, bent, but alive. An old monk named Tenzin watched from his hut on the hill. After the storm passed, he gathered his students and led them to the grove. He said nothing at first, just stood beside the bamboo. One student broke the silence. "Master, how did these survive?" Tenzin smiled. "The bamboo," he said, "has no pride in its strength, only trust in its roots and the wisdom to bend." Another student frowned. "But isn't bending the same as giving in?" Tenzin tapped one stalk gently with his hand. "Does this feel weak to you?" The bamboo swayed slightly, not from impact, just from being what it is. "No," he continued, "bending is not defeat. It is relationship. To wind, to time, to life, to understand that resisting everything is how things break." The students were quiet. Tenzin knelt beside one stalk, pressed his hand to the wet earth. "There is a lesson here," he said softly. "The strong oak is proud until lightning splits it. The mountain stands tall until earthquake shakes it. But the bamboo, it lives by letting go of control. It knows the storm will not ask permission, so it dances instead of breaking." Later that week, a young woman in the village fell ill. Severe, sudden. The doctor said it would be weeks before she could walk again. She was bitter, frustrated. Tenzin visited her, sat beside her without judgment. And after a long silence, he said, "You're in a storm now. You cannot control the wind, but you can soften. Not give up, just give in. To healing, to stillness, to time." She cried, and in that surrender, healing began. Months passed, the village rebuilt. The trees grew back slowly, but the bamboo never changed much. It didn't need to, because it had already learned what others forgot, that survival is not always about standing firm. Sometimes it's about moving with grace. There is a line in a Zen poem, "Be like bamboo, deep-rooted, open-jointed, hollow-hearted. What bends does not break. What yields is not weak. And what allows itself to sway teaches us what it means to stay." With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. The full moon rose slowly over the temple pond. Its pale light spilled across the stone paths, kissed the tips of bamboo leaves, and finally rested on the water surface. Perfect, round, and still. A quiet hush fell over the garden. Even the crickets seemed to pause. It was as if the world had stopped breathing, just long enough to notice the moon. But what the monks gathered around the pond saw was not the real moon. It was only a reflection. A novice named Kaoru sat cross-legged near the water's edge. She had come to meditate, but found herself staring at the luminous circle. It shimmered with every ripple. It danced when the breeze blew. It fractured into 1,000 pieces when a frog leapt across. And yet, when the pond stilled again, there it was, whole, unmoved, unaffected. The head monk, Master Renji, approached quietly. He sat beside her without a word. For a while they both watched. Finally, Kaoru whispered, "It looks so real." Renji nodded. "It does." She tilted her head. "But it's not. It's just light." Renji smiled. "Is your reflection in the mirror not you?" Kaoru hesitated. "I don't know. It looks like me, but it's not me." "Then what is it?" he asked. "A copy," she guessed. Renji turned to her. "And what is your idea of yourself?" She blinked. "A reflection." Renji picked up a small stone. He held it above the pond, then let it fall. Plop! The moon shattered again. 1,000 tiny moons danced outward on the ripples. "Does the moon mind?" he asked. Kaoru laughed softly. "No." "Does the moon change?" "No," she said again. Renji looked at her gently. "Then let your mind be the sky, not the water. The moon is always whole, whether you see it clearly or not." That night, Kaoru wrote in her journal, "I chase shadows. I polish reflections. I mistake the moon in the water for the truth." The next morning, during temple chores, Kaoru knocked over a bowl. It shattered. Clay and rice spilled across the floor. She gasped. But instead of panic, she remembered the moon. A fellow novice scolded her. She bowed, cleaned the mess. Inside, she felt no shame. Only the quiet smile of someone who had seen a truth. Weeks later, a guest philosopher visited the temple. He asked the monks, "What is real?" Some spoke of emptiness, others of causes and conditions. One offered the Heart Sutra. But when the question came to Kaoru, she said, "The moon and the water." She explained, "The moon is reality. The water is our mind. When our mind is still, reality reflects clearly. When disturbed, the image breaks, but not the truth." The philosopher nodded slowly. "That is poetic, but how do you know it's true?" Kaoru looked up. "Because when I stop chasing the reflection, I feel the light on my face." That night, Master Renji shared a final koan with the gathered monks. A monk asked, "Master, what is enlightenment?" The master pointed to the moon in the sky. Then he pointed to the moon in the water. Then he smiled. No answer, no explanation, just two moons. And the silence between them. There is a saying in Zen, "Do not mistake the finger pointing to the moon for the moon itself." And so the teachings end where they began, with a reflection, a still pond, a moon that never moved, and a student who finally stopped looking for herself in the ripples. The forest path was dappled with golden light. Shafts of sun fell through the tall teak trees, casting long shadows that shifted with the breeze. a group of monks walked quietly, their feet bare on the earth, their minds turned inward. They had been traveling for 2 days now, through fields, across shallow rivers, under wide skies that watched without comment. And ahead of them, seated on a smooth, flat stone beside a trickling stream, was the Buddha. He was waiting, not impatiently, but as a mountain waits for the wind. The monks approached and bowed. Some sat, others stood, resting their walking sticks against the roots of a banyan tree. One among them, Ananda, had seen something on the road that troubled him. A farmer's son had been bitten by a snake. He had seen the child cry out, flailing in fear and pain. The boy's wound could be treated, but the panic, the despair that had settled in his eyes lingered in Ananda's heart. And so he asked, "Blessed One, why do some suffer more than others, even when the wound is the same?" The Buddha turned to him gently and answered with a story. "Imagine," he said, "a man walking through a quiet field. The day is calm, the air is warm, and then," he raised his hand, "an arrow strikes him." The monk stirred slightly. He gasps in pain. The wound is deep. The arrow has pierced his flesh. He clutches at it. This, Ananda, is the first arrow. He paused, but then the Buddha's voice softened, deepened. Then the man grows angry. "Why me?" he cries. "What have I done to deserve this?" He curses the heavens. He blames the gods. He weeps not only for the pain, but for the story of the pain. He looked slowly at the circle of listeners. That is the second arrow. Some monks frowned slightly, as if trying to follow an invisible thread. The first arrow, the Buddha said, is the pain we cannot avoid. The body ages. Illness comes. People leave us. We are wounded by life, by loss, by chance. He drew a line in the dirt with his finger, but the second arrow is the one we shoot into ourselves. He tapped his chest lightly, with thought, with resistance, with fear, with story. Ananda nodded slowly. "So the suffering comes not only from what happens," he said, "but from how the mind meets it." The Buddha smiled. "Exactly." A young monk, Rahula, tilted his head. "But Lord, if a man is struck by an arrow, how can he not cry out? How can he not fear the pain?" The Buddha's gaze was kind. "He may cry out," he said, "but the wise man does not turn the cry into a prison." He looked at Rahula. "You may feel pain, but you do not have to become pain." The wind rustled through the leaves above them, as if nature itself exhaled in agreement. To feel sadness when a friend dies, that is the first arrow. But to say, "I will never be whole again," or "I should have done more," that is the second. He pointed to the stream beside them. Water flows. It does not cling to a shape. When pain arises, let it arise. See it, feel it, but do not wrap your identity around it. An older monk, who had once been a warrior, bowed his head. "I have carried many arrows in my life," he said softly, "not in the flesh, but in memory." The Buddha nodded. "The past is full of arrows we keep alive with thought. The future is full of arrows we imagine before they are even shot." He looked toward the trees. But the present holds only the first arrow, and even that, when seen clearly, passes. A silence followed, the kind of silence that isn't empty, but full. The Buddha let it linger. Then he spoke again. You are not wrong to feel pain. You are not less awakened because you grieve, or ache, or tremble. He gestured to his own chest. This body too has known hunger, illness, sorrow. He placed his hand upon the ground. But when pain comes, I do not build a house around it. I do not say, this is me, this is mine, this is forever. He looked at each monk now, one by one. To awaken is not to avoid arrows. It is to stop shooting the second. Later that evening, as the monks prepared camp near a circle of moss-covered stones, a fire crackled quietly in their midst. Ananda sat with Rahula and the older warrior monk. They said little, but their silence was different now. Not numb, not avoidant, just aware. Rahula watched a moth flutter near the flame and whispered, "Even the fire burns only what touches it." Ananda smiled. The old monk closed his eyes. And in that moment, the Buddha's words drifted across the darkness like a breeze through tall grass. The first arrow belongs to the world. The second belongs to you. You can choose to set it down. In time, the teaching of the two arrows would find its way into distant lands, distant minds, translated, adapted, retold. Some would call it psychology. Others would call it mindfulness. Some would not give it a name at all. But beneath every version, the truth would remain. Pain is part of life, but suffering is what we build atop it. A story, a wall, a self. But when we learn to pause, to see the first arrow for what it is, and let go of the second dash, then peace returns, quietly, naturally, like a wound that knows how to heal. She had heard hundreds of stories, pain layered on pain, grief knotted with shame, rage disguised as silence. Dr. Anjali Mehta was a seasoned therapist, 47 years old, calm voice, warm eyes, a room filled with soft lamps, quiet bookshelves, and a single blue armchair that caught the afternoon light just so. She had learned over time that her work was not to fix people, but to witness them, to hold space, to wait, to not flinch when the truth arrived. That afternoon, her 2 p.m. client sat stiffly. Teenage boy, 17. Sleeves pulled over his hands, a stare that hovered somewhere behind her shoulder. He didn't speak for the first 8 minutes. She didn't force it. She just sat, breathing gently, grounded, present. When he finally did speak, it was one sentence. "Everyone talks like they know what I'm feeling. They don't." She didn't nod too quickly, didn't say, "I understand." Instead, she let silence do what words often can't. "There's a saying in Zen," she offered softly, "that the teacher is like a mirror. They don't speak for you. They just show you where the dust has gathered." The boy blinked, looked at her, and, for the first time in weeks, said something more. There is a deep wisdom in the pause, the moment between a question and an answer, the breath between emotion and reaction, the silence that honors pain without trying to patch it. Anjali once had a mentor who said, "You don't need the right words, You need the right presence. She had taken that to heart. Her patients didn't always thank her, didn't always improve quickly, but many came back. Because there aren't many places in the world where someone will sit with your brokenness without trying to sweep it away. She remembered an older woman once, widowed after 42 years. The woman cried for 45 minutes straight. Anjali didn't interrupt, didn't analyze, just handed her a tissue and stayed. At the end of the session, the woman whispered, "You're the only person who didn't tell me to be strong." Anjali said nothing, but later she wept, not from sadness, but from the honor of witnessing someone's unguarded truth. Therapists are trained to listen, but Anjali had learned to listen beneath the words, the tightening of a jaw, the hesitation before a name, the breath that catches after, "I'm fine." Sometimes her job wasn't to provide answers. It was to be the room where the storm could pass. She had a small bell on her desk, never rang it, just kept it there to remind herself, return to this moment, over and over. One evening, after a long day, she wrote in her journal, "People come in with tangled lives. I don't untangle them, I just hold the threads until they can begin to see the pattern. The boy in the blue hoodie came back the next week, and the next. He still didn't say much, but he sat and listened, and didn't flinch when she said his name. It was a start. And sometimes that is enough. The path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. There was once a long road that passed through deserts, cliffs, and shadowed valleys. Many travelers set out on it, seeking peace, safety, or home. But the road was hard. Sun beat down like flame. Rocks cut the soles of their feet. Wind stole their breath and sand filled their eyes. They grew tired, weary, ready to turn back. Some sat by the wayside, too exhausted to move. Others began to whisper, "Perhaps the road is endless. Perhaps we were fools to begin. Perhaps this path leads nowhere." And then they saw it. Up ahead, a city. Walls shining, gates wide, flags fluttering in breeze. A place of refuge, a place to rest. Hope stirred again. They stood, ran, cheered. Inside there were cool fountains, fresh food, gentle beds. They were safe, at last. But when they awoke the next morning, the city was gone. No walls, no gates, no fountains, only the long road ahead. And a single voice from the air. This city was an illusion, a resting place created to help you continue. Now rise and go on. This is the parable of the illusion city from the Lotus Sutra. It is a story about skillful means, the power of compassionate illusion used to awaken real strength. The city was not a lie. It was a gift, a temporary truth, a form of mercy shaped to meet exhausted minds. The Buddha is the one who created the city, not because he needed it, but because we did. Because the path is long, and sometimes we need to believe we've arrived before we can realize we haven't. In the parable, the travelers are like us. We start spiritual practice with high hopes. We read, we meditate, We strive, but somewhere along the way, we get tired. The progress feels slow. The suffering still returns. We wonder, is this working? Am I really changing? And then, suddenly, we have an insight, a moment of peace, a breakthrough. It feels like we've reached something final. We name it, we hold it, we build a city around it. But the next day, it's gone. And that's when the Buddha's voice speaks. That peace was real, but it was not the end. You rested. Now continue. The illusion city is not deception. It is timing. It is compassion shaped like form. It is a way of saying, this isn't the end, but it's enough for now. Imagine a parent on a long hike with a child. The child tires and cries. So the parent says, just a little farther, there's a surprise ahead. And when they reach a clearing, the child sees a snack, a blanket, a resting place. Later, the child learns there's still more to walk, but they are stronger now, because the kindness made them believe again. That is the illusion city. A fiction that leads to truth. A rest that becomes fuel. A stop that is not a trap. In the West, we're taught to distrust illusions, to strip away comfort, to seek truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But Mahayana Buddhism teaches that skillful means are also sacred, that sometimes what we need is more important than what is absolute. There's a saying, only a fool tells a drowning man, there is no water. A wise teacher offers a hand, even if it's through illusion, even if it's temporary. Because awakening does not demand perfection, it demands presence. It demands we continue. There's another layer to the story. The travelers who believed in the city, they were not punished. They were grateful, because that illusion saved them. And when it disappeared, they did not despair. They trusted the voice. They stood up and walked again. Commentary. We all have illusion cities, moments of insight we think will last forever, people we thought would never leave, practices we swore would fix everything. Then life shifts, and the walls disappear. We panic, but the Buddha whispers, keep going. The path doesn't end at comfort. It passes through it and beyond it. Because what we're looking for is not safety. It's liberation, not a stopping place, but the end of stopping altogether. But here's the paradox. Without the illusion city, we might never find the strength to walk again. And that's why it's not a mistake. It's a skillful gift. One Zen teacher put it this way, enlightenment is real, but the first one you find is not the last. Celebrate it, thank it, then let it go. Even the Dharma itself is a raft. Even the Buddha himself once said, if my words help you, use them. If they do not, leave them behind. The illusion city teaches us not to cling, not even to the things that save us. Because truth moves, and we must move with it. One traveler asked the Buddha, how will I know I've reached the end? And the Buddha smiled. When there is no more need to ask. Until then, let the cities come and go. Let the rests be real, even if they're brief. And when they vanish, bow to them, thank them. Then stand up and walk again. The path was dry that day. Dust lifted from the earth like breath from grief. It clung to her ankles, soft and persistent. But Kisa Gotami did not notice. Her feet moved forward, bare and steady. Her arms, once empty with loss, now carried the truth. It had been some years since she had fallen at the feet of the Buddha, begging for medicine to save her dead child. Then, he had sent her through the city, asking for a mustard seed from a house untouched by death. At every door she knocked, and at every door sorrow had already sat before her. Now she understood no house was free from loss. But this story begins not with her arrival, nor her wisdom, but with the silence before it. Kisa Gotami was once radiant with joy. She had married into wealth, borne a healthy son, and laughed easily beneath flowering trees. Her life was not lavish, but it was full. Her husband was kind. Her in-laws praised her for her quiet strength and good nature. And her child was the axis of her world. His laugh echoed through the garden, a sound so bright it seemed to ripple the petals of the lotus pond. But when sickness came, it moved like fire in dry grass. First, a fever, then the cough, then the silence. Her husband wept, her in-laws prayed. Neighbors brought herbs, ointments, and whispered remedies passed down through generations. But nothing stilled the trembling of the boy's limbs. Nothing cooled his burning skin. And then, one still morning, as dew clung to the leaves and the world turned quietly onward, he stopped breathing. Something in Kisa Gotami's mind refused the truth. It broke, not like glass, but like a door slammed shut against a storm. She did not bury him. She could not. Instead, she wrapped his small body in linen and cradled him close, as she always had. She walked barefoot through the streets, her face blank with disbelief, her voice hollow with pleading. "He is only sleeping," she whispered to merchants. "There must be something, some medicine, some root. Please help me wake him." People pitied her. Some turned away, ashamed. Others wept at the sight but dared not speak. A few offered dried herbs or quiet prayers, not to cure, but to comfort. But none could give her what she asked for. Then one old man, gentle and weathered like the bark of the Bodhi tree, placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Go to the Buddha. He sees clearly. Perhaps he will know what to do." So she did. Through dust and heat, she walked to the monastery, her arms still wrapped around the stillness of her child. Her eyes, dry now, saw only hope. When she reached him, the Buddha met her gaze with unwavering calm. He did not flinch at the bundle in her arms. He did not speak quickly or softly or with sorrow. He simply said, "Bring me a mustard seed from a home where death has not visited. Then I will help." Kisa Gotami bowed deeply, grateful beyond words, and ran. House after house, door after door. She knocked. She asked. She waited. At the first door, a woman with kind eyes shook her head. "My brother died last winter," she said. "I'm sorry." At the next, a man held his son in his arms and said, "If only. We lost his mother at childbirth." At another, a young girl barely older than her own son opened the door, tears still fresh on her cheeks. "Grandfather passed last night," she whispered. Each story struck her not like a blow, but like a chisel, slowly carving away at her illusion. With every encounter, her burden changed. The weight of the child in her arms remained the same, but the grief within her no longer stood alone. It became something shared. a river of sorrow running through many homes, not just hers. And in that shared space, she found the first breath of peace. She returned. She did not knock this time. She did not beg. She simply walked to the Buddha and placed the body of her son before him. Then quietly she said, "I see now. There is no house without sorrow." The Buddha nodded, and without ceremony, without demand, he welcomed her into the Sangha. She shaved her head, took on the robes, learned to breathe again, learned to walk not to escape grief, but to carry it with grace. The seasons passed like silk through her fingers. She became a teacher, not of words, but of presence. Her voice was never the loudest, nor her gestures the grandest. But when she sat beside those in pain, their breathing slowed, their trembling eased. She was the stillness they had forgotten could exist. One morning, as the sun rose pale over the bamboo grove, a young woman arrived at the monastery. Her face was drawn with confusion. Her hands trembled with exhaustion. Her eyes were red, but not yet emptied of tears. She had lost her father. Suddenly, cruelly. Though she had performed all the rites, burned all the offerings, sat in silence beside her mother, something inside her chest would not still. "I do not know what to do with this ache," she said. She asked for Kisa Gotami. The nun sat beside her beneath a neem tree. Birds moved through the leaves above them, and the distant sound of sweeping could be heard from the monastery steps. Kisa did not rush. She listened, let silence breathe between them. Then she placed a small, smooth pebble in the girl's palm. "Carry this," she said, "for 3 days. But each day, speak to one person about someone they have lost. Ask for their story. Then return." The girl did as told. And on the 3rd morning, she returned, eyes swollen, chest raw, but breath moving freely. She knelt at Kisa's feet and wept, but the tears came with space, with rhythm, with healing. "I thought I was alone," she said. Kisa Gotami nodded. "Grief is a shadow," she said. "It grows darker when we sit beneath it alone. But when we share it, it moves, it thins, it teaches." The girl asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "What did it teach you?" Kisa looked to the far hills, where the morning light softened the edges of the earth. "That the heart does not break from love," she said, "but from the illusion that love can be possessed. My child was not mine. He was a gift. So were the mornings we shared, the soft sound of his feet, the questions he asked at twilight. His death was not punishment. It was part of the changing tide. We do not own the ocean, but we can learn to swim." The girl placed her hand over her heart. "Will this ache ever leave?" "No," Kisa said gently, "but it will grow roots, and from those roots something will bloom. You will never be the same, but you may become more." The girl bowed low, forehead touching earth, and so another seed was planted, not of mustard, but of compassion. Kisa Gotami came to be known not for her loss, but for her light, for the way she listened without rushing, spoke without preaching, held without clutching. She walked through villages not to convert, but to sit, to be, to remind those in pain that no house stands outside sorrow, and no heart must bear it alone. Thus, The lesson of the mustard seed lived on, not in the search, but in the returning, not in the seed itself, but in the soil of shared humanity it revealed. A monk once asked his teacher, "Master, where does the path to enlightenment begin?" The teacher did not answer. Instead, he stood up, walked across the room, and swept the floor. Later that night, the monk asked again, "Then where does it end?" The teacher looked up from pouring tea and said, "If it ends, it was never the way." This is the story of non-arrival, the path that unfolds not to get somewhere, but to be fully where you are. Long ago, in a forest monastery, a wandering monk arrived seeking answers. He had studied every scripture, debated with scholars, and meditated in caves for years. And yet, he felt restless, incomplete, as if truth always lived just beyond the next bend. He bowed to the abbot and said, "I have walked many roads. I seek the one that leads to awakening." The abbot nodded and replied, "Very well. Walk with me tomorrow at dawn." The next morning, they walked. Through bamboo groves, past quiet ponds, up rocky trails where mist clung to the earth like breath. They walked all day. The monk said little. By dusk, they had returned to where they started. The monk frowned. "You promised to show me the path." The abbot said, "I did. We walked it." The monk blinked. "But we arrived nowhere." The abbot smiled. "Exactly." The student wanted something linear, a goal, a peak. A moment where the sky split open and declared, "Here it is." But the Dharma is not a destination. It is the walking itself. It is the attention you give to each step, the space between one breath and the next. The Buddha did not climb a holy mountain to reach truth. He sat under a tree and stopped seeking. You do not become awake like winning a race. You remember the truth that was always here. Under the hurry, beneath the striving, inside the stillness of the now. When we think of progress, we think forward. Farther, better, beyond. But what if the path moves deeper, not farther? Inward, not onward. Like returning to the place you began, but seeing it clearly for the first time. The monk eventually understood. He stopped chasing high teachings, stopped measuring his worth by distance traveled. He began to walk slowly. He bowed to doorways, thanked his bowl before eating, washed his feet with care, and in those simple moments, something softened, something opened. There's a Zen saying, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." The tasks do not change, but the one doing them no longer seeks to arrive. He is already home. In the end, the way is not mystical. It is making tea without rushing. It is folding robes with full attention. It is greeting the morning with breath instead of thought. And in those everyday movements, the path walks itself. The old abbot left behind a note before his passing. It read, "Those who hurry are carried by illusion. Those who walk with it vanish into the way." The monk later became a teacher. When asked by a student, "Where is the path?" he would only point at the floor beneath their feet. "Here," he'd say. "Now walk." So if you are still searching, still waiting to feel worthy, enlightened, or arrived, pause. Notice your breath. Feel your weight on the earth. Let this moment be enough, because the greatest truth, there is nowhere to get to, and still, you walk. In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. He sat at the back of the community hall, near the exit. Not hiding, just watching. The others talked, laughed, poured coffee from large silver thermoses and passed around paper cookies from supermarket trays. But he didn't move, didn't smile, didn't speak, just watched. His name was Curtis. Army jacket, grey beard, hands that twitched slightly even when still. He had come to the meditation group because his VA counselor suggested it. "You don't have to talk," she said. "Just show up." So he did, and for 6 weeks, he said nothing. But he returned. Same chair, same silence, same eyes that carried too many memories to speak aloud. The teacher never pressed, a woman in her 50s with a quiet strength. She guided them through breath awareness, walking meditations, and loving kindness phrases that sometimes made people cry without knowing why. Curtis never joined the group circle, never chanted, but he always listened. This is not a story about what was said. It's a story about the space that held what could not be said. One evening, during a guided meditation, the teacher said, "Imagine someone you've never forgiven. Now imagine letting go, not for them, but for your own peace." Curtis's jaw clenched. His breathing grew sharp. Then, it softened. After the session, he didn't leave right away. He walked slowly to the window, looked out at the parking lot lights reflected in puddles, and whispered, "I used to listen for footsteps every night." The teacher said nothing, just turned to stand beside him. Curtis continued, eyes still out the window. "In Iraq, we slept light. One sound, just one, meant someone might die. When I came home, the silence felt louder than the gunfire." She nodded, not with pity, but with understanding. "The breath," she said softly, "is where the past visits, but does not have to stay." Curtis nodded once, not to agree, but to acknowledge. In Buddhism, there's a concept called the middle way. Not indulgence, not denial, just being with what is without running or pushing. Curtis didn't heal overnight. There was no miracle. But he started walking more, started breathing deeper, started sitting with his pain instead of being swallowed by it. And slowly, the silence became less sharp. One night after the group had left, he stayed behind. He rolled up the mats, wiped the floor with quiet care, turned off the lights, and before he left, he bowed. No one saw it, no one needed to. There's a koan that says, "Show me your original face, the one you had before the world told you who to be." Curtis was learning to meet that face again. Not as a soldier, not as a broken man, but as someone who could sit with sorrow without becoming it. One evening, a new veteran came to the group. Stiff posture, uneasy eyes. Curtis noticed. After the session, he walked over and offered a single sentence. "Don't worry, you don't have to say anything." Then he sat down beside him, and they watched the rain together. Healing isn't loud. It's not sudden. Sometimes it sounds like silence learning to be gentle. Hospice is not loud. It hums like twilight. Low lights, quiet steps, gentle beeping. And in room 7, the breathing was slow. Draw in, pause, let go. Again, the man in the bed was old, thin skin, tired eyes. Hands that had once built houses and held babies and shaken enemies' hands. Now they simply rested, still, soft, folded like leaves. Nora was his nurse, not young, not old. Calm eyes, a voice like warm water. She didn't rush, didn't flinch at grief. She moved like someone who had seen many endings and knew each one was different. This is not a story of drama. It's a story of breath, and the lesson it teaches when it leaves. The man, his name was Harold, had no visitors that week. His wife had passed years ago. Children scattered, caught in their own lives. Nora checked his vitals, fluffed his pillow, placed a cool cloth on his forehead. He looked at her once and said, "I'm afraid to let go." She didn't respond with philosophy, didn't offer reassurances. She just said, "Let's breathe together then." They sat in silence. Inhale, pause, exhale, again. Harold's breath was jagged at first, then smoother, then softer. He didn't need words. She didn't need noise. The Buddha once said, "As a flame blown out by the wind, so quiet is the mind of one who has understood." That night, Nora came back during her break, brought a small wooden statue, Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. She set it by the window. "Just someone to keep you company," she whispered. Harold blinked in thanks. As the hours passed, his breath grew shallow. Draw in, pause, let go, and one moment. The pause lasted longer. Nora leaned in. Stillness, no panic, no alarm, just the hush of release. She sat beside him for a while after, not because it was protocol, but because endings deserve presence too. Later, she cleaned the room gently, changed the sheets, lit a small candle, and placed the statue back in her pocket. Another nurse asked her, "How do you do this every day? Doesn't it get heavy?" Nora smiled softly. "It's not about carrying. It's about letting go over and over, until even the grief becomes quiet." People think death is about final moments, but in truth, it's about how you breathe until you no longer need to. Harold had taught her something, not in words, but in how he met the moment, afraid, then still, then gone. The next morning, Nora placed a sticky note in her locker. It read, "Let go like breath." Just a reminder of what Harold gave back to her. In this life, we inhale ambition, loss, joy, sorrow. We hold so tightly. But the final wisdom is the exhale. Not to disappear, but to return everything we borrowed. The sun hung low over the fields, casting long golden shadows across the dry earth. At the edge of a quiet village, 2 mango trees stood side by side. One was tall and strong, its branches heavy with fruit. Its golden mangoes glowed in the light, plump, sweet and fragrant. Children would stop and stare. Travelers paused to admire. Birds sang in its branches as if drawn to its beauty. The other tree was bare. Its bark was worn, its limbs crooked. It bore no fruit, and no one stopped beneath its shade. But this second tree, quiet, unnoticed, was the Buddha in one of his past lives. And this is the story of why he chose to remain fruitless, for the sake of something greater. Long ago, the land had been wild. The forest grew thick around a small monastery where a humble sage lived with his disciples. He taught them to observe closely, to see not just what was obvious, but what was true. One morning, while walking through the woods, the sage turned to his students and pointed at two saplings growing side by side. "These trees," he said, "were born at the same time, but they will live very different lives." The students blinked. "They look the same," said one. The sage only smiled. "Wait." And the years passed. The first tree grew fast. Its branches stretched wide. Its roots drank deep from the stream nearby. And when its first mangoes came, the villagers discovered them. Sweet as honey, smooth as silk. They came in crowds. Children climbed its limbs. Merchants took its fruit to sell in town. Goats rubbed their backs against its bark. Travelers broke its twigs for kindling. Even the birds, once gentle, began to peck at its flowers for their scent. And still, the tree gave, but over time it began to lean. A branch cracked under a child's foot. Its roots loosened from the trampling of cattle. The fruit became harder to grow, and some seasons it had none at all. Still, the people came. The second tree grew quietly. It bore no fruit. No children climbed it. No travelers plucked its leaves. Birds rested gently in its shade but never stayed long. The villagers ignored it. But its bark stayed smooth. Its roots grew deep. Its trunk remained upright and still. And it watched. One summer, the king of the region came to the forest on retreat. He set up camp near the fruiting tree. His cooks, servants, and soldiers lounged beneath its shade, praising its sweetness. Then one of the ministers said, "If this tree has served so well, why not cut it down? The wood would make fine furniture. The fruit is nearly gone, but its trunk could be carved into chairs for your throne room." The king, intrigued, gave the order. And the next day, the great fruiting mango tree was felled. Its branches snapped, its trunk cracked open. Its roots, noble and deep, were torn from the earth, and all the forest fell silent. Later that week, the king walked through the woods again and saw the second tree, bare, small, and unremarkable. "What of that one?" he asked. His minister shrugged. "No fruit, no use, not even shade. Let it be." And so, it was spared. The sage, watching from a distance with his disciples, bowed slightly to the bare tree. "Do you see?" he said. "Sometimes what survives is not what shines the brightest, but what draws the least desire." The disciples looked at him with puzzled eyes. "But Master, was the fruiting tree not noble? Was its generosity not good?" "Yes," the sage said gently. "It lived a life of service, and that is honorable." He looked toward the bare tree, but this one made a choice, a quiet choice. It saw what happened to its brother, and though it too could have borne fruit, it chose not to, for the sake of survival, for stillness, for watching without being consumed. Many lifetimes later, the Buddha would recount this story to his own monks. He would say, "There are times to serve and times to endure, There is merit in offering yourself to the world, and wisdom in stepping back, not from fear, but from foresight. And the story passed through generations, told to children not to make them afraid of giving, but to teach discernment, to remind them that not all service must be seen, that sometimes quiet restraint is a form of compassion too, because the world will always chase what glows, but sometimes what glows too brightly gets torn down, and what stands quietly survives to keep teaching. As the lantern of awareness glows a little brighter, we come to a tale about seeing with more than the eyes. Let the stillness guide you now, and listen carefully to the next story.